I think that Greek mythology is fundamentally a more plausible view of what it would like to be immortal than things like Christian myth. A world in which you are immortal is a world in which nothing matters. And for Hercules in particular, because you were mortal and now you are not, it is a world in which, aside from nothing mattering, you're going to have to deal with that alone. I think this is absolutely horrifying. This is a life worse than death. A life where there is nothing worth dying for is a life where there is nothing worth living for. We are incredibly, incredibly proud to stand in proposition. First thing to prove, why I think it's incredibly hard to feel that anything matters in a life with immortality in a way that I think means you are going to be miserable. The problem is this: choices become trivial with immortality for a number of reasons. Firstly, and it all comes from the fact that you have infinite time. A, your choices are not mutually exclusive. In the real world, when you are a mortal human being, when you are somebody who has fallen in love with a particular person, as Hercules has done, your choice to spend your life with them is a choice to not spend your life with somebody else. There are no go-backs in that particular way. And that means that that choice is something that you have to invest with huge amounts of value. Not so when you're immortal, you can just do anything. Secondly, if things go bad, you can just try again. So who cares if this marriage or this friendship goes wrong? What is the point in putting in the effort to make sure these things go well when you are just going to have infinite amounts of time to make them go better again? Thirdly, if it's really a clarification, yes.
So you're agreeing that Hercules becomes a god, not remaining a demigod?
It says live forever, so I think the motion at least implies that you are going to be immortal. Like, live forever means this, come on. I don't think this is that relevant to our case, but fair clarification. Thirdly, I think it's incredibly hard to deeply desire anything. Desire in immortality is desire in immortality is fundamentally connected with lack. You desire things that you do not have, and you desire them precisely because you do not have them. You see them as things that are valuable because you don't have them yet. That's why I want to do things like do well in debate tournaments when I haven't before. You don't get that when you are mortal. You will get them eventually. And I would notice that this kind of psychological characterization of the way in which mortality imbues life with meaning is likely to be particularly true for Hercules for two reasons. Firstly, he is somebody that while he was on Earth was facing life or death combat and was forced to go into those kind of trials. He had superhuman strength, sure, but he was going up against superhumanly hard tasks. The prospect of death was a very real one for him. We know that because that's why the gods were so impressed and sent him to heaven, sent him to live on Mount Olympus. At that point then, he has lived a life fundamentally concerned with death. He has lived with death as a reality. Death has shaped his perspective and understanding of who he is. You are going to rob that from him. Secondly, it's because other people know that this is true of Hercules. All the people he cares about in his life, all of the crowds that chant his name, the woman he fell in love with, also love him for being that person who was able to conquer death in that way. You are demanding that fundamentally he abandon that conception of who he is. I think that is in itself essentially equivalent to death. In terms of impact, I think you are going to become lazy. I think you are going to become depressed. I think you are going to become restless and frustrated, because when you have everything, none of it matters in the first place. Second argument, you are going to be alone. And I think this leads on from the, I'll take you later on. I think this leads on from the first, because the point is just this. The gods have never been mortal. You have. And for all the reasons that I described, mortality is something that is likely to have been hugely influential in shaping your conception of who you are. At that point, I think it's incredibly difficult to be able to relate to other people, to feel seen as an equal, because they've never had the sorts of experiences that you have had. Now, I anticipate a response here. Why is it that this sort of mortal experience is going to be something that is lasting in shaping who you are? Because obviously, the thing about immortal forever is that it's a hell of a long time. Why is this going to continue to shape your conception of who you are? I think there are four things to say here. Firstly, earlier experiences are formative over your conception of who you are in a way that later ones aren't. The reason is this: the early ones shape the way that you understand the later ones. You see things that happened later in your life in view of things that happened in the first. First relationships are incredibly important in shaping like how you view future ones. You see like the future ones in light of things that went wrong or well in the first. You try to do better and to grow and move on because you like that part of your past still lives with you. At that point, I think this is likely to be salient. Secondly, I think this part, like aspect of your personality, is likely to be far more influential over who you are. Because as we've just described, it's a far more intense kind of feeling. It's a feeling of longing and love and desperation. You are never going to have anything of the same intensity once you're a god. That's why it's going to shape who you are. Thirdly, it's because social relations spiral in the way they affect you. If I treat somebody else badly in the first instance because I don't understand them, that tends to be something that means that we treat each other better, like worse and worse later on. There tends to be this spiraling effect. So even if this only shapes who you are at the start, it probably, like those social relationships tend to spiral. Yes, I'll take Theo.
All of this case assumes that for some reason Hercules prioritizes his own pleasure. Maybe he experiences this pleasure. Why does he prioritize meaning?
Because the whole, like people like make fun of the word meaning. Like I think all that meaning really means is the sort of happiness that is fundamentally fulfilling. This is something that I think actually matters. Fourthly, and fourthly, and quite importantly, as said in the intro, the gods themselves are also likely to behave in this way that is horrible because they are under these same conditions of meaninglessness themselves. Note, guys, the Greek gods are assholes. You probably know this from Percy Jackson as well as I do. What do I think that means? I think it's incredibly hard for you to be able to relate to other people and to feel understood and seen. And I think that is something that is likely to be destructive of your relationships with these people. You are going to be alone. You're going to be alone despite there being other gods there. And why do I think this relatability is so incredibly important? Because it's what allows people to be vulnerable to one another. You can only have the sort of vulnerability that is the precondition of genuinely fulfilling relationships when you are able to trust one another to share your worst parts with them. When you're able to go to other people and have them help you cope with difficulties because you feel that they understand you and that there is that basis of understanding. When you can love those people. Because love requires the ability to see other people's faults, to see the way in which they are struggling, to truly appreciate them for the best selves and who you are. None of this is likely to be the case at the point at which you're going to have fundamentally divisive bonds between you and everyone else in Olympus. Look, I don't think life is an inherent good, and I don't think saying that life is a precondition of utility, maybe that got close to working in one final, but I hope it doesn't again. Life is also the precondition for disutility. There's going to be an awful lot of it under our side of the house. Very, very happy to propose.
I'd like to thank that speaker for that very fine speech, and I'd like to invite the leader of opposition to open the case for their side. Hear, hear.
Can I be heard? Cool. Yeah, cool. The Prime Minister spent 7 minutes talking to you about why Hercules wouldn't want to become a god, why it's all bad, and this might happen, and that might happen. Well, we don't know what he will think of in the future. And we don't have access to that future and how that future will manifest. What we know, and what we know as a fact, is that this dude spent a whole lot of time nearly killing himself in order to get that recognition from Mount Olympus. So, let's actually make this debate what it's really about, which is the fact that you have two competing things. The want to go to Mount Olympus and love, which by the way, is also fun and not boring, like the Prime Minister. So, Olympus, let's have fun. Olympus is basically Balkans with infinity money glitch and either no corruption. And we think that this is a world where we would prefer to go as Hercules. What do we know about Hercules? Because note, Prime Minister doesn't spend any time telling you what we know about Hercules, right? They just tell you, here's what we know about humans. But there's nothing about specifically that individual. What do we know? We know that this is a person who considers himself a hero. We know that they consider legacy as an important thing. We know that they fight for justice. And we know that they really, and this will become really important, value self-sacrifice. And that is important because of the fact that what this individual wants, what we see is a very virtuous individual who has quite much thought about what they want to do. And then suddenly, Megara appears. And then you're in love. And the question is, which one of the two do you prioritize? The bottom line is that our side is the one that's in line with the identity and the fact and the characteristics of that identity that we know, and that effectively he then becomes a demigod or a god or whatever you want to define it, that is able to make his father proud, the first individual in the Mount Olympus that people like, probably based on the characterization we get from PM as well, and effectively it gets recognition. Why is it then that Hercules is better able to serve those characteristics when in God. This is crucial. First of all, we think that this has to do a bit with like respectability politics, kind of, i.e., you go to gods and you try and solve one of the issues that basically people of your kind, that is demigods, face. It has to do a lot with Percy Jackson as well, which you guys seem to be getting your info from, so it should be able to be quite clear. You basically go there, we think that you have the capacity to do a few things with your newfound powers as well as your newfound position. You're able to talk with them, you're able to mediate with them and the demigods because of the fact that they've never had the experience and the interest to see what it is that these individuals look like. They've never had the experience and the ability, epistemic access into what being a demigod is, and they will never be in a position to have someone in Mount Olympus that is able to do that for them. Secondly, all the things that they say will make you feel bored, for an individual that really cares, probably they are good. For instance, having infinite time with infinite resources to send people help and help the people who are actually in the real world, probably something that you really care about. What is it then that even if you struggle, and also, by the way, kind of sneaky, but you can also help Megara if you really love her. We think that you're in a position to guarantee things such as her safety, you're in a position to protect her, etc., which is the true manifestation of love in this case. Why is it then that even if you struggle with things such as leaving your real love behind, etc., you're able to get things on our side of the house, you get the legacy, and you get the self-fulfillment on the characteristics we know to be facts, rather than speculation, which is what proposition does. And also I would like to add here that time heals everything. The more you distance yourself from a situation and the initial pain, the more able you are to create coping mechanisms in order to overcome more and more what initially that pain felt like. And maybe, who knows, he might fall in love again. So, why is it then that processing and rationalization of that choice is going to be significantly better on opposition side? The first thing I want to note is how do we envision this happening? We think that these two are two people in love. We think that they're likely to go on and like it's the equivalent of sending a WhatsApp message and saying, hey, I want to talk. They go and they talk about the options that they have. Megara knows, and in fact, there are two scenarios here. Either truly loves you and understands him for who he is and the fact that this all has happened for the fact that he wanted to be in a position to help people, or maybe doesn't understand him then who like we don't care. Because of the fact that you lose something that wasn't as meaningful in the first place. Additionally, I would note that love is a bit overrated in this specific scenario, and it's mechanized by the PM as well. For most of the time, you want what you don't have. So once you have something, it's less likely that you commit to it. Notice, this they can't refute because of the fact that they would be stabbing their opening or they would be contradicting themselves. Because of the fact that, for example, when he got Megara, then they become bored, there's no guarantee that you're going to love her forever, there's no guarantee about the quality of that love, whether or not it's going to be toxic or not. Here's why it's more likely to be toxic on proposition side. The first thing to note is that the way that Hercules will think, I'll take a few while from closing at some point, is that it's easier to rationalize that decision and whatever regret might come from it. They said it themselves. You kind of know how bad gods are, but you don't know what Mount Olympus is like. You don't know what living there is like, which is fundamentally important because once you choose to stay on Earth or whatever in the real world, then you are going to always compare yourself to something. What do we prefer to compare ourselves to? Do we prefer to compare ourselves to something that we know, and basically can do a pros and cons analysis, or the unknown, which we will never be able to understand what it's like, what could have been, what resources I could have had, how much I could have helped, what would I be doing if I actually had made that choice back then? And as a result then, the rationalization of that choice becomes significantly more difficult. Before I move on to closing.
Who was Hercules' mother?
Who was it? I don't know. And honestly, I don't even give a shit because I'm Greek and I don't know that. Like, I'm not even ashamed. I don't know. You guys know. Mentis was paying attention in class. I wasn't. So, moving on, I think that then, as a result, you're better able to rationalize that choice. But in the absence of that rationalization, you have a toxic relationship long term. Because whenever you see Megara, you're going to see the reason as to why you didn't make that choice. You're going to see the what if in the face of the woman that you love. And this is something that fundamentally harms a relationship. It makes it toxic, it makes the what if a daily task, and it makes it a toxic relationship where you project those doubts to Megara. But lastly, Megara herself is harmed by this. She internalizes the guilt. She feels like she owes him for the fact that he didn't do the thing that he fought the most for. And now she feels that she has to owe him something, that she feels like she has to be the best. This is insane pressure to put on a person, and the reasons why relationships can in fact be very much hard. There's no guarantee on their side of the house that this love is going to last forever. Like, literally, they can't prove it. But there is some guarantee on our side of the house that whatever happens, he's better off in rationalizing whatever choice he makes. Very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank that speaker for that very fine speech. Now I'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue with that proposition. Here.
We're good? When Pandora's box got opened, the only pure emotion that got ossified in the human condition was hope. A hope in an immortal world where you are forever taken unseriously, where you are ravaged by incommensurable guilt that you left the person that you trusted your entire life. This is a life not worth living. This is a world in which the regrets that they mention, which is the metric, by the way, becomes immortalized. That is our premise in opening government. I chat to you about love. First, I want to give you a biological essentialism claim out of opening government and telling you why human forms of love are the ones that Hercules has the most epistemic pig-shot access for. Firstly, we biologically have urges to procreate that are incommensurable in our bodies. That is to say, we come in with the biological needs to have sex and to have progeny. Secondly, even if that's not the case, as they mentioned, creating a form of legacy is important, and having a child is the most proximate form for you to create legacy, because at the end of the day, it is your flesh. At the end of the day, it is your genetics. Thirdly, and importantly, humans have invisible pheromones that make us attracted to each other. So when Fraser and I slept together in the same bed last night and I woke up feeling some kind of way, that was not because of things I could control, but because we intrinsically are attracted to other humans that we can't control. And this is certainly the type of dilemma that Hercules faces. But the type of love that he requires is one that can only come in the form of human loving. I will go further on to prove this in my later extension. Then you might be thinking to yourself, and this is the first burnout proof, why are you unable to find love in the gods' world? Why is it incommensurable to the love that you would have with Megara? And I think these were rightful claims pushed out from Odo. Firstly, you will always be unable to make them feel satisfied. Because at the end of the day, the only reason why you're there is not because you possess a special gift, like the gift of like controlling waters like the water god does, or the way of controlling mountains the way the mountain god does. It's just because you're very strong, you're very determined, that makes you a human, but in an ultra-human form. There's this differentiation between a god and you. And therefore, secondly, and for other gods, there will always be someone else. Secondly, you will always be unhappy because your love will always be relativized to Megara. And the guilt that you feel, that you felt, was selfish, because presumably throughout this entire trial process, Megara was the only one who was by your side. Megara was the rock in your corner, and you just gave up all of that to never be able to see her again. The jealousy that you feel that Megara has moved on, the jealousy and uncertainty that you feel will plague you for immortality. And then the third thing I just wanted to prove here is that there may have been something about Megara, the fact that like she helped protect you, and also note in terms of this that Hercules, what he cares about is the human form of love that God simply can't replicate, right? I mentioned this. Okay, and fourth and finally, and I think this is just specific to like Greek gods, but they always fucking cheat on each other. There's always not a degree of loyalty with each other, and this is because you're immortal, so therefore you don't really have that biological need to settle down with someone, have a kid, etc. Which is why, like, as a POI probably formed, like, I'm pretty sure Hercules was born out of wedlock, etc. Right? Okay, no, not you. I'm sorry. The second burden I want to say in today's thing, like, why is this, at the end of the day, a meaningful decision for you as Hercules? The first thing I want to know is that love intrinsically is life affirming, right? By accepting to stay with Megara, your love, you're basically guaranteeing your death. This is to say, you still have feelings of anxiety and fear.
But now you know where that fear comes from. The fear that you have found someone that it is worth dying for, that it is worth giving up all of these positive benefits of immortality for. You can internalize that fear, and importantly, you have a face to paint it to. This is why, for instance, Megara will most likely not feel a degree of guilt, because throughout this process, Megara has probably reconciled the fact that there is a chance that Hercules will leave her. That is the reason why we think love is important. Then they might claim, you might feel spite in the future. Firstly, highly unlikely, because you don't return with any form of jealousy. You're superhuman. It's highly unlikely someone else's biceps will be bigger than yours. Someone else will be as attractive as you objectively. And secondly, emotionally, you're going to be really close to her as well. And secondly, spite also implies that you're so dissatisfied with your present condition to the extent where a counterfactual being in this heavenly place will be better. Unlikely to be the case. Firstly, you're going to be the king of the peoples, the person who goes against the elites of the gods to say that fuck you know what I mean? I prefer to be human than you. Secondly, large amounts of capital to spend on your wife, etc. And thirdly, love is a choice multiplier because it frames the way we view finite resources and time. I gain money and I think about the ways I want to spend that on my significant other. Every minute I spend with them feels significantly longer. The last thing I want to talk about is that fact that your one true love is mortal and that they will die. Before I continue closing, anything? No? Shoot. No, yeah, go.
Oh, sorry, I heard. Okay, you keep using the fact that Megara is something that is worth dying for.
Yeah.
This is not a mechanism, this is something that has to prove.
No. Okay, look, you have immortality, infinite happiness, and you choose to not do that because of the fact that you want to stay on human form. Apparently, Megara was probably a very, very big impetus for that because they helped you throughout the trials, etc. The last thing I want to talk about is that your one true love will die. And Fraser's talked to you about how the early years are the most formative, and you basically, every time you have sex with someone, you're going to think about Megara, you're going to think about all of this, and you're going to basically relativize your love based off of that. And it also means that as they age and die, you see a part of you dying as well. And you can't be with them for that. The impact for this is that contrition that you feel is alone. Because no other fucking god has experienced that form of mortal love before. They can't give you the support system that you need. There's like a house, and I think they lose when they say this. They basically claim, and this is important, they claim that you can help them, give them money, keep them protection. The one fucking thing you can't protect them from is death. And when that happens, you're going to be the one who feels as if you hurt them and you weren't able to be with them as they took their last dying breaths. The last thing I want to talk about is adaptive preference formation based off of temporal constraints. When we know that death is inevitable, and we know that one day we will die, the more we age, each minute with someone that you feel is special lasts longer. Because it feels as if we don't have that much time left. So we value the few time that we do actually have left. On their side of the house, life and minutes and hours feel shorter. And at the end of the day, even any type of relationship they can get is incommensurable to the one that you have in mortal form. This is the only way in which you view love. Very proud to propose.
That speaker, that very fine speech, I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to conclude the top half. Here.
Am I audible? Okay, I have a history with mics, that's why I'm asking. Bano, Hercules is not just any human. He's a narcissistic white man born of privilege. Since the day of his birth, he was graded with gifts. All of the people from the Olympus came to him. They gave him the strength and power of fucking Superman. So when they say that his defining characteristic and his love for humans is what defines him, I say no. I say he's much more than that. Mortality is not his defining characteristics. It is okay when you're Superman to go in the fire because most likely you're not gonna die. Most likely you will prevail, especially when along the steps of your journey there are multiple gods that tell you you are different, you are special because you are white or because you're a god, whatever in these particular senses. So this person has, with all of these things, has chosen to do good. which is nice and it gives him a lot of meaning in these things. But let's not kid ourselves. Doing good is not inherently good in this particular sense. This is a person who thrives on validation, who likes to be celebrated, who likes for the people around him to tell him how strong he was, how beautiful he was, how he's the perfect human being in all these particular senses. He needs that in his life, in this particular quest, and he needs to be the next level. This is what he was born to do. This is what he believes in these particular situations. What do narcissists want? Don't ask me how I know about this. You live your life in cognitive bias. Most of the time, unfortunately, you think about yourself. Even when you're with your beautiful wife or whatever, you kind of think about other things that are happening in your life. You can't help it. You're a narcissist in these particular senses. So in many of the situations, even when you're in that, you start thinking. With time, when you grow old, when things start to hurt, in all of these particular senses, you ask yourselves more and more times, why did they make the choice? And subconsciously, or even not subconsciously in some cases, we know how white men can get sometimes, you start blaming your life in these particular situations. You start blaming her subconsciously, you start ignoring her, you start putting her to the side, you start telling her some things that she maybe doesn't want to hear in these particular situations. It's very likely that it goes bad, and it's very likely that it's not fair to her. It's not fair to her even on a principle level to put her in a position where for the rest of her life, it's you, somebody who has been given so much power, have chosen to put this particular burden on her. The second thing is, and this is something like, because they are only at the start of their relationship opening government, so there is just a moon phase. But the relationships are quite different. Just because you love somebody doesn't mean that you're compatible together. It doesn't mean that you have great sex. It doesn't mean that you have a great life together. It doesn't mean that everyday life is going to be nice for you and you're going to find a way where, like, I want to sleep in another bed. Oh, if you sleep in another bed, that makes me feel like I'm not loved enough in this particular situation. There are many things that can happen in relationships. These kids are fucking young. Yeah, maybe they love each other or they think they do love each other in this particular senses. Many things can happen along the way. We say you shouldn't make this decision based on that. We say the pressure that you now put on these relationships working out is even further, which is likely going to lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy and actually be bad, even if it could have been kind of okay. Then they say you can have a child. Presumably if you're a god and Zeus had a child, you can have a child as well. In terms of, like, if they're going to go for the legacy comparative, if you're a god, you have a much better legacy, I would say, in this particular sense. Then they talk about, like, this whole thing of uncertainty. Newsflash. Life is uncertain. Even if every choice that we make in life, there is another choice where we could have done something else. This feeling of uncertainty we can never get rid of. The neighbor's grass will always be greener. What we say is comparatively, while we will still feel uncertain that maybe we should have chosen love, the viscerality and the strongness of regret on our side of the house towards the unknown Olympus, with the gods, with everything that can solve your life, with all the pain, with the best drugs in the world, it's fucking Balkans without the money problems. It means that you strive for this, and this unknown will always feel like it could have been a better choice, versus the ones that you know. Because yes, you love a human, but you also have seen some bad things from human. You see them betray each other, you see them cheat on each other, and all of those particular things. I would just like to just note in this round that you're also like a white privileged man who would like to fuck a lot of around, especially if you're a Hercules type of guy, you know, the macho type, all of you know that guy, so it's gonna probably fuck up the relationships as well. So, on the way of regret, we feel that the regret is going to be stronger, especially over time and things like that. We, on our side, say, over time will heal some of your problems. Like, we really don't know. I say, like, structurally prove that he's most likely a narcissist, or at least he has some level of narcissistic tendencies. We think that he'll be fine over time. He's going to, like, think about himself, find another love, and things like that. But even if he doesn't, in the worst cases, go to Aphrodite. Make her give you the spell where you love somebody else. Make her give you a spell that stops you from love. Make you get all the beautiful ladies that you want, or the beautiful men that you want. By the way, what if he's bisexual and he wants to fuck him? Like, Megara is not okay with that. Like, another incompatibility in this particular sense. This doesn't work. No problem. You go to Dionysus. He gives you the best of Ambrose. You get fucking drunk, you get fucking high. It's the best high ever.
Love is important not because it is easy, but because it is hard.
Oh, sounds very nice. I wanna fucking do drugs, man. And most of you do as well. So look, there is like in the worst of deaths of hell in these particular situations, you find yourself in the most bestest of places in the fucking world. There is multiple coping mechanisms, be it drugs, all those things, and you're immortal. You're not even gonna get hungover. Can you imagine this? Can you imagine getting drunk every day without getting hungover? In these particular senses, you will be fine. You will cope with it. And we say you will cope with it not only because you're I don't know, Andrew Tate type of motherfucker, but you can actually have a probability on our side of the house to process all of these things and understand that there are other things. And you have to sacrifice some part of your identity for another big part of your identity that to this moment has been crucial for you. I think life sucks. I think they agree. I think it's painful. I think you will see your loved ones die in front of your eyes on both sides of the house. I think it's going to be bad. I think you're going to get old. I think everything is going to hurt. Why not do some fucking drugs?
I'd like to thank that speaker for that very fine speech and everyone for what was an inebriating debate so far. I'd now like to invite the member of government up in the back half. Hear, hear.
Is this alright? Okay, yeah. Good. Walter Benjamin once wrote about the angel of history. It is being helplessly blown by the winds of time into the future, but it faces towards the past. The catastrophes and rubble of history are constantly thrown at its feet. Benjamin writes, the angel would like to close its wings, to stay and raise the dead and make whole what has been smashed. Immortality is a curse. The extension from closing government is simply why life with the gods will make you miserable and infinitely miserable. First premise, what are the gods look like? Let's characterize them. 3 things. 1, they don't really care. Oh, by the way, PM assert that they're bad people. We're going to prove why they're bad people. 1, they don't really care about anything, and they're particularly bored because they've been in Olympus for infinity. And so the way that they make joy is by using humans as mere playthings. What we know from the info slide is that they have forced you to undergo a series of horrible trials. They have used for no particular reason, right? They have simply used you for their own mere entertainment, by turning humans into animals, by messing around with their affairs. The gods are not benevolent. Secondly, they are characterized by petty competition, because the only ones that are actually on their level are also other gods, which means that they engage in incredibly petty competition. Like in the Trojan War, the only reason why some set of gods supported Troy and some supported Greece is simply just because they wanted to fuck each other over. They didn't like each other, and so they just killed hundreds of thousands of people and condemned them to death. Thirdly, they are the most greedy people you could ever imagine. They're constantly demanding tribute, constantly demanding libations, and forcing farmers to sacrifice their livestock for them. It is the pinnacle of egoism and of selfishness. Second premise, why do you reject all of these things? 1, I think it goes against your fundamental values. Odo claims you are narcissistic. I think there are 2 problems with this. 1, obviously it is a matter of extent. Maybe you are narcissistic to the extent that you want like some external validation, sure, but you are not narcissistic to the extent that you are going around actively fucking over people for the fun of it, for absolutely no other reason than to get a little bit of a kick in the morning. But secondly, in the ancient world, virtue, the morality was inculcated within heroes like Hercules, is defined as selflessness. Why is that the case? It is because the reason why the concept of virtue, of heroism, exists in the first place to begin with is because we crucially need this idea which we have constructed to get people to do the right thing and not the convenient thing. We need to jolt people out of their natural instincts, of their inclinations, which is why Hercules is inculcated in this particularly selfless belief. Hercules is a virtuous person. He is a soldier who cares about his community and fights his belief. And what does that mean? It means that for him, things have weight. That person you saved has weight. The town that you saved matters. All of these things you only do because to some extent they have some gravity for you. You fight for others with all of your heart because they matter to some extent. When you go to Olympus, you completely forsake who you are. You, as Hercules, are the man who shares a goblet of wine with your soldiers on the battlefield before you march out to die. You are not the man that lounges on Mount Olympus, purely indulging in only sensual and material pleasures. This is not who you are. And note, he also particularly hates these gods because they are omnipresent, but they have chosen to create evil. They could absolutely do anything in their power to make life good for people, but they have actively chosen to make life a hell. I think Hercules knows this, which is why he rejects these gods as alien to him. But second reason why why Hercules would hate this, is because he has personally suffered at the hands of the gods. He has gone through the most important years of his life, when he had fallen in love with a woman and he wanted nothing more to do than to spend time with her and have children, is to go through these labors, to have these trials which were extraordinarily taxing, which fundamentally shaped who he was. Zeus, his father, he's literally the product of sexual assault. I cannot actually emphasize to you just how much of an endemic problem this is to, Greek mythology, right? It's literally 99% of all of these ancient texts. He knows just how much his mother has suffered. He knows what, to the extent that other humans have suffered. He knows how cruel they are. Before I go on, opening.
Isn't this exactly why Hercules should be there? Exactly because he knows it, whereas they don't. All
Next,
those things you've said are just sitting
premise. You, as a person, change over time. You become that which you hate. I think that this is a necessary outcome of immortality, of infinite indulgence, of never having to make a choice. You started off as the hero. You started off as the virtuous one, but you slowly, over time, lose grasp on who you are. You start finding yourself caring less and less about these things. You check up less and less on Megara and on your family because in the infinitude of time, slowly, nothing matters. You wake up and you look in the mirror and you no longer recognize who you are. And we say that the only thing that is worse from being alienated from others is being alienated from yourself. Opening opposition says you can help people, but you can't help people if you become cruel and you become apathetic as a necessary outcome of all of these factors. The thing is, we do not do things for sheer utility. It would not explain why parents sacrifice everything for their children. It would not explain why soldiers sacrifice themselves for their loved ones and for their country. It does not explain why people choose to do what is correct over the thing that garners the most utility. Human beings are essentially creatures that care about producing meaning, not sheer utility. The next premise I want to prove is why sadness compounds over time while happiness erodes over time. Elo says, time heals. An opening government says, Megara will die, that's infinite sadness, but also as opening opposition say, you get infinite happiness. Why is there a crucial asymmetry? That is to say that over time, you don't become more and more happy, but you do get more and more sad. The simple reason is that trauma builds and compounds. Happiness quickly sets a new benchmark by which you judge everything else. Our intuition, if the same bad thing happens to you twice, you get increasingly traumatized. Those things compound over each other because they remind you of the harrowing experience that you've had. But happiness, if the same good things happen twice, you forget about the first good thing. You aren't more happy than you were before because you've just had the same dopamine receptors fired off. But trauma, the wounds that rack up over the course of your infinite life, are the things that build on top of each other. You see your loved ones die, your city fall, but also just the trauma of living with these monsters, these absolute motherfuckers who you think are antithetical to everything you believe in. And so the harm is not just that you regret this, or that you feel a little bit guilty, which is what opening governments say. It is that in the infinitude of time, all of these traumas compound over each other, and they too grow to infinitude. On the comparative, yes, human life isn't perfect either, but at least you can retain who you are, to see all of the evils of the world and to actively reject them, to rail against them and to fight against them, rather than transforming into the thing that you hate, rather than eroding into nothing. And at the very least, the blessing of life is at some point it ends. This flips opening opposition on happiness, but explains why you will not regret this decision. I think that Hercules knows that this is the right thing for him. We think that the angel of history is the one that suffers most of all. Very proud to go.
I'd like to thank that speaker for that very fine speech. Now I'd like to invite the member of opposition to continue the case of that opposition. Here.
CG are totally right that gods can be assholes and you care about people. We don't want to go to Olympus to become a druggy narcissist psychopath like Niki wants to. We want to go to mitigate the worst evils of the gods. I will analyze the metric later in my speech, but note, all teams agree with us that you're self-sacrificial, heroic, brave, inculcated from a young age to be a self-sacrificing hero, and keenly aware of the harms that gods can do to humans, feeling very strongly about it. Let's start by explaining why you'll be able to change things in Olympus. Note, this is LO's missing burden. They concede that you want to help from Olympus, but given the info slide says you can never return to Earth, it's entirely unclear how you can comparatively help more when you're not on Earth. I want to start by explaining that you'll become respected on Olympus, flip the idea of relationships coming in from OG, and explain how you'll have influence and power in Olympus, and what you can do with this. Inform gods, befriend gods, contact theory with gods, conflict with gods, and how this leads to an endless lifetime of impacts of gods behaving better. Let's start then with why you'll become respected on Olympus, because note, you're the greatest human in history, and Olympus recognizes your meritocratic value. You're the only one to beat the trials, to prove that that you fulfill all of the virtues, that you can survive any opponent despite only having the power of a demigod, like hundreds of others of Zeus's sons. But secondly, you're the son of Zeus, who's the king of the gods, and now you're a member of Olympus. All of the gods who are sons of Zeus have significant power, but you are the greatest demigod son of Zeus in history. You've achieved something no other son of Zeus has, and Zeus has risen you to godlyhood. That means everyone knows that you are a favorite of Zeus's. This gives you allies, it gives you influence, it gives you respect, and it specifically gives you the ability to influence Zeus. He's rash, but he listens to those that he loves and respects. And if you have a lifetime to understand what makes him tick and how to persuade him to intervene against bad actions of gods, you have the greatest ally in Olympus in your pocket. At worst, if you can just influence him 1% of the time, this is for endless history, so this compounds to endless times that you affect him. But secondly, you'll have good relationships with other gods in Olympus. Let's flip OG here. OG says you're the only one who's ever been mortal. That makes you fascinating. You're the handsome, charismatic, muscular, heroic foreign exchange student. You're the human who is a god. Getting into bed with you is such a success that minor goddesses will forever fight for you and try to ally you just for the chance that, okay, all the gods in Olympus are bi anyway, so all of the gods are going to want to do this with you. And then the second thing he says, gods are horrible, but not all of them. They also each embody a sense of morality. They each protect a vulnerable community, a god of travelers, a goddess of mothers or maidens or wild animals. They each have a virtue they value. Hephaestus values production and creation. Athena values knowledge and stability. The impacts of this, so what are the impacts of creating? So this means that you're able to connect with them on the virtues that you agree with them on, and you're also able to strengthen their morality, because none of them have ever been challenged by a mortal, but you're there to do this with them. The impacts of this, what do OGs say are the impacts of lack of relationships? They say, you won't be seen, you won't be heard, you won't be understood. Bullshit. Even if you're not understood as perfectly as a human could, you don't care. You are going to increase their understanding of humans endlessly compared to what it was before you, and that's what matters. You don't care if they understand you enough to support you. You care if they understand you enough to understand what they care about humans. So this means that you'll have influence and power in Olympus. You have Zeus's favor and the favor of many other minor gods. You have the respect of the gods as a great and brave warrior, and you have the attention and admiration of the gods. When you speak, they want to listen, because they've already had an eternity to hear what all the other gods have said. But they have never heard your life story, and it is fascinating to them. That means that the virtues embodied in your life, the bravery, the self-sacrifice, that's what they now hear and are exposed to. What specifically can you do with all of this influence and power? First, you can inform them. They just don't know what the human experience is and how they're affected by these godly machinations. They're ignorant. The gods are ignorant. They're not evil by their nature. It's like children who throw rocks at cats. They don't know what the experience of a cat's life is. But if they adopt a cat, interact with the cat, and go, hey, this cat is cool, they're no longer going to throw rocks at cats, and they're probably also going to oppose whale hunting. Maybe they'll even go vegan. But secondly, you get to befriend them. You have an eternity to learn their likes and dislikes, their heuristics, and how to persuade them. You build a rapport with them. You build trust, and you build mutual respect, meaning they care about your opinion and they value the stuff you have to share with them. Third, it's contact theory. For the first time in history, a human is their peer. Someone who has had the human experience, who can share that human experience. They can now see that humans can be good, that human lives can matter, that humans can be moral actors and stakeholders, that gods should value and care about humans and not just see them as playthings. But finally, you can conflict with them. You are a full-fledged member of Olympus, with the ear of Zeus. You are a far greater fighter than most of the gods. Very few minor gods can beat the Hydra or the Cyclops. This gives you can threaten them with violence. And gods do listen to violence. You can mobilize your allies against them. You can threaten them with sanctions for their bad actions soon. The impacts of this are fewer wars that the gods create, less interventionism of the gods in human affairs, less careless treatment of human lives, less haphazard creation of demigods who end up becoming tyrants or monsters who end up terrorizing communities. And I want you to note the long-term extent of this. Even if you buy me 1%, even if you believe that you can help more from Earth, that on Olympus you can only help 1% as much in each given year, we have endless years. They only have a few decades or centuries. So if you buy my impact at all, you must buy that we have endless quantity of this impact over time and endless influence on the gods that is also incredibly exclusive. Before I justify this metric, opening.
We were clear from PM that the misery immortality causes leads eventually to an inability to care enough to do all the good you described. Why do you keep the motivation?
Amitai will explain why you don't backslide, but I want to explain the metric here. On OG say, I want you to note, they want interest. We give you a noble quest that justifies your forever attention and care and effort. You will never get bored until the gods are perfect. And if the gods are perfect, we win this debate. On OO's metric note, in LO they say you want to leave a legacy. You want to be heroic. You want to give self-sacrifice for justice. Note, Niki then tries to stab this and say you're a psychopath who just wants drugs. But that should be seen as a rebuttal to what the LO says, which is the first metric they justify, and at no point do they explain why the second metric of pleasure matters more than the first metric they say of self-sacrifice. But finally, what do we say specifically here? You're taught from a young age to be a kind and helpful hero. You understand the games of the gods and their harmful influence, because you've saved countless humans from this, because Ares was horny that one time, and now you have to fight a monster. You see the wars that gods fight because of secondhand vengeance, Hera destroying an entire culture just because the king there is a son of Zeus. This is greater than any other metric. You've already depicted your willingness to self-sacrifice. OG say this themselves. You now have tons of power, time, and influence to sacrifice. Of course you would sacrifice your love with Meg. You have already been willing to die rather than stay alive with Meg for self-sacrifice. For all of these reasons, proud to boast.
I'd like to thank that speaker for that very fine speech, and I'd like to invite the government whip to conclude the case of that proposition. Here.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. The closing government extension is simple. The values of the gods are actually incommensurable with who you are as an individual, and we would rather live a limited life of virtue than one of apathy, vice, and unbounded sadness. Importantly then, we prove to you why it is that your values are constitutive of who you are as an individual, and that this is the sort of principle that you should be willing to protect even at the cost of eternal life. Why is it that this is true then? What Aidan explains to you in our extension is that your values are what you hold the most important in who you are. They are an expression of your ability to influence the world around you and to basically project the values which you hold onto the conditions of the material world. At the end of the day, your principles are essentially an expression of what it is you wish to change the world into. You don't compromise on them merely because the factual situation is different, and you should be willing to stand up for them. What Aidan then proves to you is that not only do you place yourself in a position in which you're no longer able to help the people that you care about the most, but also that you're likely to be corrupted and end up what you most hate. Essentially an individual devoid of empathy for the people that you care for the most right now.
even if opening opposition is right to say that you will be happy about this in the future, I would note that this is not immediately a good thing. Even though it would be the case that I know that if I became a heroin addict in the future, I would be happy whenever I inject, this is intuitively not a good thing, because being addicted to heroin is not a desire which I value. In this same sense, we fundamentally reject the idea that this is a desire which you should ever want to put yourself in the position of having. Let's get into the whipping then. First thing, I want to respond to the cases here from closing opposition, then I'll talk about opening opposition, finally I'm going to weigh us off against our opponent. Let's go through what we hear from closing off, where they fundamentally focus on your ability to be able to help other individuals. The first thing to note is that for closing opposition to have their case, they need to deal with our analysis for why it is that your values become compromised. As in, even if you initially do want to help individuals, if Aidan's analysis is right, this is a desire which fades away very quickly. Importantly then, this is likely to happen far faster than it would were if you to remain on the earth, where you would, even if you don't become immortal, continue to have influence on the gods. Even if you're on earth, exactly like they say, you're still the son of Zeus, you're still the person who was offered the spot, and if your analysis is right, you're probably even cooler for having been the guy who rejected the position. You presumably can still influence the gods in this way. However, I would go a step further, and I would say that the gods actually don't respect you, and they are never going to see you as one of them. You're merely the diversity pick, you're the small kid who managed to make his way up onto Olympus, and they're never going to take you seriously. Why is it then that the gods are not going to respect you in this matter? I have two responses here. Firstly, even if closing opposition is right to say that gods sometimes care about humans and their suffering, note how often they're willing to essentially ignore this for the sake of their own conflicts. That is, of course, when it is convenient for you to have people, you do so, but you don't really treat individuals as basically the kind of creatures worthy of your moral admiration. That is, you're always willing to compromise them for the sake of your own ego because you're a piece of shit. The second thing, though, is that you just don't really follow through on this sort of protection in the long term. It's very much like a game of Sims for them, right? It may be the case that you sometimes open a cheat console and you help the people, but it's very often the case that gods are going to go back on this. You're going to impose a natural disaster on the same communities that they were meant to be helping. Importantly, note what the gods did to Prometheus. When Prometheus tried to provide the flame to humans and to treat them as agents, he was exiled, he was subjected to eternal torture. I don't think that these are people who are worthy of your respect, or people who you should be trying to emulate into who you are. Importantly and finally though, it's most likely to be the case that you're going to rub off on you far more than you're ever going to rub off on them. This is because, one, it's the case that you are in a very vulnerable position. When we find ourselves in these situations, this is presumably when we're the most impressionable and the most likely to accidentally compromise on what we believe. Secondly though, these beings have existed for basically all of eternity. They're never going to be persuaded merely by someone who has had this information for a few years. They are far more likely to change you before you change them. Thirdly though, the argument about epistemic access is just false. The gods, presumably, are omniscient, if not in principle then in practice, given they're able to basically be anywhere, be invisible, have access to this information. I don't think that there's an actual practical benefit in what closing opposition says. Finally, on the idea of disagreeing with other gods. Even if you're the strongest man, it's not clear why you're able to put up a fight with them. And per the motion, it's the case that you're not ever able to return to the human world. Even if you're able to basically help things from afar, this is barely going to count for what you would have been able to do if you're still alive. Next up, I'm going to respond to opening comments, but before that, I'll take a few lines.
Preferences can change over time. That doesn't make them less valuable. Live the life you want today, and live the life you want to live tomorrow.
So I think that the issue with this claim is that for it to be true, you would need to have two different preferences which are of equivalent desire. I want to note two different reasons for why it is that this new set of preferences is distinctly worse than the one you have right now. Firstly, there is a fundamental difference between virtue and vice, which is not subjective. That is, the reason we pride ourselves on different human virtues, things like temperance, things like intelligence, is because in wisdom, these are the types of things which further human goals. As in when you exercise the virtues, they tend to support each other and they help you realize the ends you want into the world. Note how vices distinctly don't do this. As in, when you're someone who becomes lazy, when you're someone who becomes hedonistic, these both work against each other, but also they prevent you from realizing who you really are and who you really want to be. They're merely things which basically stop you from influencing the world as I described earlier. And more so than that, they do so at the expense of the people that you most care about. I would posit this as intuitively very wrong and not something we should ever support. On to the rest of opening opposition. Firstly, on the idea of having a desire to be validated. Importantly, I would say that you probably already have this validation when you're the strongest person on earth. You are not a god. For the reasons I gave you, you're never going to be a full god like the rest. You have the second best thing. I would also say that as Aidan proves to you, these gods are people who have tormented you. They have tormented innocent people in the evil they have created. And this is something you have to set yourself out to fight and prevent. Given that, I don't think these are people you respect. You're fighting the evil they're making for the sake of the individuals who they're tormenting. The fact that you do so doesn't mean that you like the game that you're making you play, but rather you feel compelled to do so despite the fact that the gods are toying with you. It means that you're willing to sacrifice yourself for the sake of others. Given that, I think we're unique with a team that explains to you why it is that you're basically able to fulfill your desires. Given our analysis and our way to distinguish why it is that the torment and the trauma you accumulate is going to basically reduce any happiness you get inside the position, you have to go to closing argument. Thank you.
I'd like to thank that speaker for that very fine speech, and now I would like to invite the opposition whip to complete the case for side proposition and indeed the debate as a whole. Here.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. This speech will just be weighing why the sense of meaning that I get from helping humans matters much more than love, and it matters much more than the pleasure I can get on Olympus. And we're going to start by showing why we think we prove this in the most new way overall. Let's start with the attacks we get in our case. 2 things that I think CG says. One is, you will slip. But notice that their logic for why you would slip is very circular. You would slip because you stop doing the actions that help the humans, which means you feel like you're degrading yourself, and so you lose motivation, and so you slip further. But they never explain why there's initially the loss of the motivation to help people, which means that it's not clear why the actions that you engage in start being so, start disappointing you enough in order to leave that lifestyle. We give you 2 reasons why you won't leave it, that they concede to in MG. 1, the constant awareness about how much you hurt people means that there are constant reminders, even if you wish to get them out of your sight with drugs. The fact that Zeus talks about his wrath in destroying the city reminds you of your purpose. But secondly, we think that on Olympus, when you ask yourself, why are you there and what is the unique value as opposed to other gods, anytime that you assess what it is that you bring, you remind yourself that your unique value is in being a human ambassador, is in being the one that knows the plight of humans. For those reasons, you don't slip. Secondly, they say, but you won't get respect from the gods. But I want you to know what a low threshold we have to prove in order to still prove massive impacts on humans. We only need to prove that you have some allies that listen to you. That your dad, that's the fucking king god, is going to believe you when you tell him to temper his anger and think twice about destroying a village or town. Or about solving drought in a specific city by just waving, by the wave of a hand, by replenishing the river. It looks like things like making a war end by simply sending a godly envoy to someone, saying that it will end badly. All of these are things that we get access to even with one god, even if Zeus doesn't want to cooperate with you. It's the amount of leverage and power that you get being a member of Olympus, and the additional powers that OG agree you're going to have. Secondly, I do think that gods will respect you because they never engage with the fact that gods care about power and the fact that the king god is going to be mad at them. In fact, their characterization in MG probably explains to you why this is a more primary incentive than wanting to do what they ideologically believe in, because they say that gods are lazy. They say that gods are about the path of least resistance. So what is the least path of resistance if not to anger the king of the gods and his son and just conform to their wishes? Let's weigh this. Why do we think that it matters much more than satisfaction, pleasure, and love? Look, you probably already understand that there's an extent to which I feel good when I do good things. And there's an extent to which I feel good when I can have sex or when I can be with my loved one. Why is the first thing so much more important? One, it is much more constant. It is true that I can remember good things that I did. Maybe I can remember my time with my loved one, but I'm not always going to be near her. She will die at some point. And we think that those memories might be a nice reminder, but they're never as visceral and as immediate as the knowledge that I am doing something right. Because it's not something that's temporally passive. I know that I represent humans. I know that I am the reason for why they were saved and why they still exist. And so it's a much more constant welfare. Secondly, the point that CG makes about desensitization actually works for trauma as well, because much like dopamine triggers get used to happiness, also trauma triggers, or even if it's not directly in the brain, it's the fact that you learn all sorts of skills to deal with it, that you see that you don't die time after time. You do not, however, get desensitized to the sense of meaning, because it was never an immediate impulsive reaction. It's never something cognitive. It's always the rationalization of what it is that you're doing on this world that makes you feel good when you make humans' lives better, and that rationalization will never go away. Thirdly, I also think that even if you enjoy slightly more on their side of the house, you recognize that your actions benefit others, and it's not one or two people, it's millions of people. And notice that if they want to say is that you care about Meg, you probably through her care about other humans. You know that she doesn't want her society to starve or die or collapse. So insofar as you prioritize other people to some extent and not just your own enjoyment, the fact that you know that you're benefiting so many people is another reason for why you prioritize this. Lastly, I also actually think that our case solves a lot of the problems that governments raise about the lack of joy. Because the fact that you work so hard, the fact that you face resistance with allies, as CG say, the fact that it's a trade-off with the amount of time that you spend on this as opposed to drinking ambrosia and nectar exactly proves why you don't get bored and why there's still some effort involved in the act of making humans better and of making sure that they're not decimated. That sense of resistance is something that doesn't go away, and that's the problem that OG and CG have. Chop have.
Whichever team is correct about what exactly Hercules wants and values, right now we know he values something, that it will be far harder for him to value anything if he becomes immortal, so we know that our impacts lie.
Yeah, but the thing that you say you know is exactly what we are saying Hercules prioritizes. You start your speech by explaining why he's a hero, why he fights for people, why he has spent his life trying to protect Meg and trying to protect others, which the Input like tells us, rather than enjoying and engaging in hedonist behaviors. We actually think that the revealed preference weighing, if anything, goes to our side. Just a quick note on why this is more important than OO. They say something about helping humans. This is unanalyzed as to how to help humans. It's also not explained. Note when they say at the metric of recognition, right, this is what they have left, not on pleasure. It's just not clear to me why the promotion doesn't already do this. So if they say you want to feel achieved and you prioritize Olympus, you already have gotten achieved and already know that you met the metrics that Olympus sets. Why do you need to be a god in order to fulfill this metric to a greater extent is unclear to me. I think that it's much clearer why you have to be a god in order to help humans, and it's not sufficient to just know that you have gotten the promotion. Let's now talk about a few quick direct responses to governments. OG tell us it's not ME because, okay, whatever, dealt with that. Integral part of my identity is fighting death. The fact that it's an integral part of my identity doesn't mean it's a good thing or it's a thing that I like. I think that there are many things that are integral to being a human that don't make me feel good about that. I think many people would rather not die. But more importantly, notice that it's just not true that I've lived life as a human, which is why I see myself as a human. A demigod is as different from a human as from a god. And the simple reason for this is because you will live longer than most humans, so you will still see her die. And you do know that you don't age as much and that you can avoid the dangers of death, and that when arrows hit your body, you don't die because of those arrows. We think that that means that if anything on their side, you probably expect to live forever because you see that you're not like the other people. You see that you don't age, so your expectation, if anything, is anyway that you will live forever. For all those reasons, no. Quick wave on love? No. Okay, fine. See you.